Hello and welcome to the ACES Business Academy Roundtable. I'm Jamar Brown. Our weekly video coaching series is designed to provide tested, real-world solutions to the real-world challenges today's businesses face. On this segment, Brian Connors, Managing Director of Consultants Link, and Ray Anderson, CEO of Anderson Business Coaching, joins us to discuss the 4 key issues that keep CEOs up at night. After watching, if you have any questions or comments you'd like Brian or Ray to address, simply type them up along with your name and email address in the form at the bottom of your screen, and we'll respond to you as soon as possible. Now let's welcome Brian Connors and Ray Anderson to the show.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, how are you both doing today?
Great, thanks for having us.
Good, thanks for being here. You know, Ray, we'll start with you. There are 4 key issues based on the research we've done and based on the interactions I've had with CEOs that really keep them up at night, that are the biggest challenges they face in terms of thinking about their business. And those 4 issues are time, talent, cash flow, and revenue generation. And on this program, what we'd like to do is to discuss in more detail what those challenges are, what those CEOs are thinking, and then we'd like to provide some real-world solution to those real-world challenges that are keeping them up at night. So let's start with time. And Ray, can you give us your perspective on how time is an issue that keeps most CEOs up at night?
No, I'd be happy to, and I appreciate that kind of introduction. I think as we were starting this, the CEO came in and we kind of asked him, how's it going? And it was clear that he was kind of overwhelmed, and the issue is always time. And it seems like no matter where I've had a pleasure working, whether it's a 5-man company or a 500-man company, time is really important. The thinking set and the mindset of the guy with 500 is very different, though, than the guy with 5 employees. And so what I'd like us to think about is that, bigger executives think of time in terms of Pareto's 80-20 principle. They spend typically 20, they know what the 20% of the top priorities are, and their focus on time is to use their time against those because they produce 80% of the results. The second thing I think they do differently is they multiply their time by getting the right talent, and that's going to be another part of this, is that if you don't have the right people, no matter what you do, you can't get it. But how do you find the time to be able to get those? And the third thing that I think they do is they understand the importance of having systems in place and IT to be able to maximize their time use. So those are the 3 things that I think in time that they could be doing more effectively.
I think that makes sense. But Brian, as I'm a CEO sitting here thinking about what Ray said, it makes sense. But then you think, wow, it kind of seems like it takes time to make time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most of us that's our, as Ray's mentioned, is our probably number 1 focus of our time management, hopefully, and that's how we can get productivity and effectiveness. But a lot of people, they mismanage their time, and subsequently that leads to inefficiencies, bad results. And so I think, as Ray mentioned, I think one of the common things that I think is important is taking that time and focusing it on the things that are going to matter most. And once you do that, I think basically you'll achieve better results just by managing your time better, and you'll be able to monitor that and hopefully see what happens and make adjustments as you go.
Okay, that makes sense. We're going to spend some more time on time as we move throughout the show. The next issue that I think keeps CEOs up at night is around cash flow. And obviously you need cash flow to effectively run your business, to buy equipment, to kind of keep the business moving, to pay your staff, to pay your employees, to provide training, to do a whole host of things. And Brian, with your background, I know as a financial advisor yourself, as well as working with some of the major companies from a financial standpoint, describe the issue of cash flow and why that keeps executives up at night.
Yes, very interesting. I think cash flow is so misunderstood by a lot of people, and they generally think in terms of revenue and income. But the lifeline of a business is really cash flow, because whether you're successful or you're operating at a loss in a business sense, cash flow is the key item that's going to be affecting whether you're going to stay in business, whether you're going to be able to grow, whether you're going to be able to fund the growth and get the resources, the people, and make the decisions to buy things that you need to do to grow your business. And yet, in many respects, I think because it includes not only the profit that you make, but it also includes financing activities as well, and other kind of balance sheet type of items that many people have to deal with in terms of inventory, et cetera, and those kind of things, that it gets confusing. And it's a real talent to be able to manage that. One, to hopefully make a profit, which I think at the end of the day, you can't stay in business unless you're making a profit. And that affects big businesses as well as small businesses. I think the key is to really have a good grasp of what's going on there. Obviously, having a good financial executive that can help work with the CEO and the management team so that they can really have a good handle on the cash flow, so that they always know where they are, so they can make decisions and best use their money as best as they can to grow their business. Interesting thing about it is that through the Great Recession, we've seen large businesses and small businesses be affected by this. If you can remember, back at the depths of the Great Recession, General Motors, Chrysler, Lehman Brothers, just to name a few of the big, large firms, went out of business. And one of the common problems that they had in cash flow was a financing issue, that the lifelines of their business, which was their financing activities, dried up during the Great Recession. And as such, they were in peril of going in bankrupt. Likewise with a small business, the biggest challenge I think for a small business is how do they structure financing to grow beyond just being a small business. And many small businesses I find in my discussions are limited by what they can do and raise on their own internal resources, which include their equity line of credit or any other kind of funding sources that they have, bank accounts, it could be their stocks and bonds and other investment assets that they may own. But at the end of the day, if they structure their business properly and they manage it financially very well, then they can tap into other people's money, which will be the blood flow in the case of finance activities to finance their growth. And that's a big stretch for a lot of people. And I think that's a challenge that many small business owners face. And so I encourage them to try to find good financial expertise to help them work through those problems so that they can take their business to the next level.
That makes a lot of sense. I was recently at a Chamber of Commerce event and speaking with a number of CEOs. And one of the issues that was interesting to me is that they said they don't have a revenue issue. They have great products. However, they have potential clients that want to buy a product from them, but they don't have the cash flow to buy the raw materials to produce the products for their clients. And I thought that was a very interesting issue, and it kind of speaks to what you're saying around cash flow being such an important aspect of business.
Absolutely. In terms of many businesses, it's what they can do by using their ability to raise funds to support their growth. As you know, even if you want to grow, that it takes a certain amount of investment of some kind, either in people or other kind of infrastructure. And when you do that, you're going to tap into whatever resources you have on a financial basis to do that. And if they're limited, then you're going to have a limit on terms of the amount of revenue growth you can get. And also there's a delay in terms of when the revenues show up. I think anybody that's been in business long enough knows that and understands that. And so being able to understand and to project and have a good set of financial documents that project your cash flow going forward, having at least a 1-year plan and maybe a 3-year plan, I think in the long run, you're going to be better able to understand what types of financing you are going to need to finance the revenue growth, hopefully, that you're going to get to move your business up and move your business forward.
And Brian said a very important word, Ray, and that's people. And that's the next issue that seems to keep CEOs up at night, and that is talent in the organization. How to bring the right talent in, how to keep the talent, how to train the talent. From your perspective and working with hundreds of organizations, speak to me about some of the biggest issues you've seen that CEOs face when it comes to recognizing, keeping, and developing talent in their organization.
Yeah, one of the things, and we kind of touched on it here with cash flow. I mean, cash flow is not only a money issue, it's a talent issue. And I think sometimes what I experience is that, I've had the privilege of working with CEOs at the Fortune 50 level, and they think very differently than the smaller business. And I think there are 3 things that I see different that are tied into what we were talking about in terms of time and cash flow. The first thing is they clearly understand their own personal and organizational strengths. So they know where the organization is weak, and they begin to look for things and people who are smarter than they are. They understand it's not about them, it's about where the organization's going. And that's one of the most interesting things in growing your business, and it's really a challenge. The second thing is they know what those top 20% of the priorities are, and they know what has to get done, and they look for people to make that happen. You know, the biggest struggle I see in small business, I can't find the right people, and they have a mindset that tends to think about only hiring internally, thereby committing a whole bunch of cash flow to something that they may only need on a project basis. These other executives think, I need a project, I need to get this done, and they find the right person who's willing and able and capable of doing that, and then they move on to something else without adding that to their cash flow problems. And the third thing they do is I find that they really actively seek mentoring and coaching, you know, and those of us who are former athletes at some point realize that coaching is everything, and they're open to getting mentoring, not only from the outside, but they'll look for mentoring on the inside. They're not afraid to tell somebody that I'm not as smart as you are, can you help us out? And I think that those three things in terms of talent have a huge impact, and it's a strategy that anybody can apply if they're willing to change what they're doing currently and embody these strategies that Fortune 100 guys are already using. So,
And Ray, and it sounds like you're saying from a talent perspective, it's really about the organization understanding what it is, you know, its values, its vision, its mission, and then identifying talent that fits within that versus going out and just trying to bring in the best talent. I know the other day we were talking about different, you know, you mentioned athletics, and one of my, you know, not my favorite team, but the New England Patriots, I think they do a really good job of, no matter what talent they have on the team, they have such strong systems in place that they're always competitive, but they seem to know who they are, their identity, their vision, their mission, and they bring in players that fit into a system that already works. So it sounds like that's what you're suggesting in terms of for CEOs that are watching this program to look at it differently. Is that accurate?
Yeah, no, that is, and you know, and I find the smaller the business, they tend to find, oh look, Brian's the perfect fit for what I do, and then they bring Brian in and they try to make the job fit Brian. Mm-hmm. And what I find is these Fortune 100 CEOs instead look at it from the other way and say, this is the task we're going to have to get done, this is the talent we need, these are the skill sets that are available, and then go out and find somebody who fits that, so that it makes a much more effective use of it. And it may, as we were saying, may not be a full-time thing, it may be a project, it may be an external somebody instead of somebody that adds to their cash flow problems as they move forward, because now we've got a full-time person. And the issue that when we do that, we typically, I can't tell you the number of times I've seen people who say, oh, he must be good, he's got 20 years of experience. Right. And then what we find out is he's got 1 year experience 20 times. Right. And you know, you bring him in and it's like, oh my God, what did I do?
There was just an example that made just recently with, if you followed the Yahoo story with Marissa Mayer and a Google exec, that she thought, based upon his background experience with Google, that this gentleman would be able to take the company in terms of increasing their revenue and advertising, and it was totally just the wrong decision in terms of the right person for that job, and a misunderstanding of what their capabilities were. So it happens all the time, big companies and small companies.
And Brian, we were both at an executive breakfast the other day, and it was really interesting talking to different CEOs of organizations. And I remember you made a comment about talent, about if you have the right talent in the room, then go.
It comes back to that book by Jim Collins, Good to Great, and they analyzed and evaluated hundreds of Fortune 500 companies, and the one common thread that they came up with is that you can look at the value of the company in the future and where it goes and everything in the company, and it all came down to the talent and the people that they had doing the jobs that they had, and getting the right people on the bus and giving them the right goals and mission to accomplish and working as a team to get there. But in the same mindset, we talked about specifically, you can apply that at any level, big business, small business, and we see it even professional sports, as we were talking about with sports teams, where they have an individual given a job, very specific as to what they need them to accomplish. They don't need them to be the hero or to be the star. They just need them to execute and do their job. And I think the challenge for business today is to find that talent and to employ that talent to the best of their abilities in the right jobs and the right things that they do. One of the limitations, I think, going on out there too, for small business particularly, is there are always resources limited and talent limited. It's just the nature of the business. You can only afford so much. But I think today, the new paradigm that's emerging in my mind is the ability to tap into talent anywhere in the world through virtual means. And you can align that talent specifically what you need, as Ray said earlier, by project-based activities that have specific objectives, time, and need. And then when that particular need dissolves, then you can hopefully then realign without having to keep staff on unnecessarily, and you deploy your resources elsewhere as are needed in the future. So that's a constant problem, I think, for a lot of business, and it takes a great executive team, I think, really to try to make sure that they, number one, have the leadership to lead those people in this new world, where leadership seems to be of growing importance, and also to get the execution on terms of getting the results. So.
And I think we're spending a lot of time on talent, and because I personally believe that talent is one of the biggest issues that organizations face. It's sort of the number one reason that they can be successful, and it's also the number one reason why they can struggle. And I think because when you look at time, it's how are your employees using their time. When you look at cash flow, do you have employees that are looking at ways to generate cash flow to keep the business running? And so when you have the right people in the room, they're going to figure out ways to solve problems, to fix things, to think outside the box. And so I think businesses, it was explained to me years ago, it's about the people that you have and the decisions they make. That's really at the end of the day what business is. The people that you have and the decisions they make. And if you have the right people that are making the right decisions, then I've seen organizations achieve extreme success, whether it's in healthcare or the auto industry or Google or any other company out there.
Right.
Well, I think I wanted to piggyback on what you said earlier in this, in which you said vision, values, and mission, and the good leader really has clarity of vision and clarity of values, what's acceptable and what's not. So when people come in, they fit the culture. And I think what I've seen over and over, and the reference you made earlier, is that if you bring people in just for their talent and then find that they don't fit because 9 days later you go, who did I bring into this organization? Because we didn't really do a good job of understanding this is our culture, and does this person buy into the culture before you bring them in the door, instead of finding out afterwards that all this bright talent is of very little use to you because you don't get along. And he doesn't fit into the culture. So, that's the kind of strategic thinking that is really required for a leader to be able to move from where he is to where he wants to be.
Exactly. And the last one, well, I know there's other challenges that keep executives and CEOs up at night. The four that we've identified through your research and the research we've done, time, cash flow, and talent. The fourth one is revenue generation and growth. You hear businesses talk about it all the time. They want to grow. They want to provide more shareholder value. They want to just achieve levels of success compared to their peers and that type of thing. And so from a revenue generation standpoint, what are those key challenges that CEOs face?
It's the old age adage that without revenue nothing else matters, right? It all starts with sales and bringing revenue in the door, and then you can have a viable business. But I think there's a lot of challenges. One is right now we're in a very difficult, challenging economy where the growth rates are pretty slow. And so, a lot of companies are challenged by trying to grow their top line when there's only so much demand and there's only so much money going around in the economy to support that growth. But bottom line is, yes, you have to get more sales, you have to expand your business, you have to get into new markets, and you have to think globally these days. And I think a CEO is challenged at every level on all four of those. And then it comes back to the same thing of talent. Do you have the right people to try to generate that revenue? And that can be both a talent issue, but also a training issue, as Ray would probably agree, and I think you as well as Jamar, since your background has been in that area as well. And so I think there's a lot of focus on that by the CEOs, and maybe that is, in many respects, their number one concern is bringing in revenue today to make sure that they can support their growth and support their operations in this difficult economy.
Right, and Ray, at the end of the day, I mean, it's appropriate revenue generation and putting in the right people to help generate that. And from your perspective in working with different companies, because I think part of the challenge is we want to grow, but we want to do it as efficiently as possible. We want to grow with by spending as little money as possible. And so that kind of seems to be a dichotomy of thoughts. We want to grow by spending less. But I think it's possible. What are your thoughts about that?
No, and I think the real issue that as we talk about with a clear vision, crystal clear values, and then the mission becomes much easier, because if you have that, then you begin to hire people who are functionally very, very responsible. And as we talked about the other day, these are people. If you have a good organization, the good people stay and they get accomplished results. If they find there's a disconnect, the values are bad, they find that the mission that they signed on for is very different than what is happening inside the organization. The truth of the matter, the good ones leave and the mediocre ones stay. And so, if we haven't created scalability, if we haven't created a culture of growth and respect, the organization gets stuck, and then the CEO ends up spending his time on the 80% of stuff that only produces 20% of the results. So, there's a balance point here, and as we've had conversations, it's very difficult to work on the business when you're surrounded by this vortex of problems. And I think the CEO is responsible for that. And so, part of our conversations, we move forward, how do we get to the next level when we're stuck in the middle of all this,
Right, and I think that's a great segue. We've set up the challenges, revenue, cash flow, talent, and time. And if I'm a CEO watching this program now, I'm really interested in, okay, what is the solution? How am I going to deal with these very real issues that are keeping me up at night? How am I going to be able to sleep better knowing that my organization is in a better place tomorrow than it was yesterday? And so I know that, Ray, you and Brian have established a really good partnership in terms of how to take an organization down a process to deal with these very real challenges. And I believe it starts with sort of an assessment. So can you start by taking us through, how does that process start, and where would a CEO begin?
Yeah, and I think that's a very good observation. And the way I like to put it is that you can't get to where you want to go unless you know where you are. And I think in the fog of business, with all the loose ends, the different functions and things, and the lack of clarity, I mean, it's particularly coming out of the Great Recession, as many of us has. How do we get started? And so I've always been a strong believer in assessments, because I think they help us establish a baseline. And I've had people tell me, well, assessments are flawed. Yeah, they are, but they're frequently very useful. And so we believe that there are two sides. One is the identity of the individual, what are his strengths and weaknesses, and good CEOs understand that. They're not good at everything, and they know that, but they're able to attract people who respect them for where they are and contribute to the organization. The second is, where's the organization itself? I mean, that has its own challenges. So, we strongly believe that you have to have some kind of a baseline from which to go, a snapshot of here's where we were today or are today. What do we want to do moving forward? So those are the two things that we think are important. You got to do some kind of an assessment and find out where you are. Good executives understand that. Others who are, stuck where they are going to be stuck where they are. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
So I mean, that's our perception.
So now with the assessment, I believe you use something called the quad strat.
Yes.
So just briefly tell us, how does it work, and is it anonymous? Just because I know if I'm watching this as a CEO, I'm thinking, I'm skeptical about assessments, especially if they're not anonymous, because people tend to give me lip service. So how can your assessment fight through that objection and provide very real world identifiers of challenges that an organization is dealing with?
No, and I appreciate that. Basically, how we like to start with an executive, because they are skeptical. What can I do with this? Is this going to work for me? But as Bob Beal, a consultant I had a chance to work with one time, said, every CEO pays for exactly what he needs, whether he buys it or not. And so, for us, we want to start here. And if they're skeptical, the first thing we do is we give them an assessment against the 4,000 inside of our database. And these are based on best practice in terms of strategy and culture. We have 11 elements of strategy and 8 elements of culture. And so very quickly, he can see, well, gee, this is how here's how I am against these world-class CEOs. So it gives him a visual example of where he is. So it's very powerful in terms of helping him understand a little bit about where he is, which is a foundation for then moving to the next step.
Right, and Brian, I think one of the important aspects of an assessment is, my background for 20 years, I know I don't look like I've been in business 20 years, but I have plus. But my background is in healthcare, and I like to reference doctors because the best physicians are able to identify the root cause of a problem and not just symptoms. Patients come in with symptoms. These organizations that we're talking about, whether it's time, cash flow, talent, revenue generation, these are symptoms of something.
Sure.
And I think the assessment helps to find the root cause. So from your perspective and looking at this assessment and assessments like it, how would you, I guess, describe your belief in this is the right way to start the process?
Well, I think, as Ray has very well said, and as well as some of your experiences, Jamar, is that, again, companies that are doing the same thing and continue to do the same thing, that's the definition of insanity to many people. Mm-hmm. And in today's environment where it's so challenging in a business environment, we all have to kind of think a little bit more out of the box. The problem is that what do we work on when we look at the business, because there's so many interrelated parts. It's confusing, it's complicated, and I think, as Ray described, was assessment helps us really look at the data objectively and remove some of the emotional bias that we all have in what we're doing. So we can really focus in on areas that maybe weren't originally seemed to be important, but are. I heard one example one time. There was some issue in an organization where there was a problem with the copy machine. And for whatever reason, that things weren't getting done because the copy machine was broken. Mm-hmm. And so someone would push something down and get this report out, get this project done, and well, it didn't get done on time. Why? Well, it turns out the copy machine didn't work. So there's very sometimes little things that seem to be in the way. And I think, as probably Ray has had more experience than anybody in the sense of that organizations, when there's problems come up, sometimes the staff feels threatened about bringing that to the boss. Mm-hmm. And sometimes insignificant problems are sometimes the biggest barriers to getting things done. And so if there's a kink in one part of the organization, that just flows right down the line to the other part of the organization, and no one ever asks the question, well, how do we get these people together to figure out really what we should do together? So I think the assessment process is revealing in a lot of ways. One, as Ray described, the data. Mm-hmm. But two is getting engagement by the organization about empowering people to take risk, to do more, to raise suggestions as to what can be improved upon. And it's all about continuous improvement today. Mm-hmm. And we all have to do better. Obviously, if we want to grow, if we're doing the same thing tomorrow, we're only going to get the same results. So we need to continue to try to improve. And I think assessment is just a great process for trying to really get some objectivity across the organization, get buy-in by the people that do the work, and also get leadership and the people that are directing the work so that they're all on the same team. And I think it's just been a marvelous process for companies that are doing it to get better results going forward.
And I wanted to piggyback on your experience in the medical community. You know, those of us who've had, you know, the privilege or maybe the need to go to a doctor, if I can use this metaphor, you know, if for me to go to you as a doctor and say, you know, here's the symptoms I got, doc, and you know, what I have is cancer, so would you treat me? Mm-hmm. Well, nobody in their right mind would go to a doctor who said, oh, okay, and start prescribing you. You know, the first thing he's going to say is, well, that's very interesting. We need to do some kind of a diagnostic to see what's really going on. Right. And so the point is, I have been in organizations who told me, this is what's the problem here, and this is what you need to do. At which point I say, I think we're finished here, because I can't really be of any help to an organization who isn't interested in looking at objectively what's really going on in the organization. So that's the metaphor that I think makes sense. Good executives understand the power and the need to look objectively at their organization, whereas other ones will just go ahead doing what they think is right.
And it does make sense. And I think we've set the stage for the importance and the significance and the value of doing an objective assessment, you know, like the quad strat. Mm-hmm. Once you've gone through this quad strat as a CEO and we've identified several indicators or issues in the organization, then what? What's the next step? Because I'm already thinking it's more work. It's going to require more time. Mm-hmm. So how can you, if it is a myth, I'm not sure if it is or not, but from your experience, how can you address that for me as a CEO of a company?
Well, I think, let's go back to the issues that we talked about to begin with. You know, we've got time, we've got cash flow, we've got talent, and we've got revenue. And as you said before, Jamar, you know, most of this is simple. You know, I mean, there isn't anything that's rocket science in this, but it's not easy. And, you know, having understood that, once what we find with the quad strat, all of a sudden there becomes this clarity, because out of the data comes up these 3 or 4 things that are significant to the organization. Not because Ray Anderson in his wisdom said so. This is what the data says. This is what the people inside the organization say. So it really opens up the door to communication. Everybody is humbled when I talk to CEOs and they realize I don't have a clue when it comes to question 4 or question 8. So it really helps open the door to humility. And in that, what happens is every time we've had a small team of 5 to 6 people, could be the executive, could be the functional managers, they are now much more receptive to hearing each other's problems. That in itself is a major breakthrough. It shifts things, and within a matter of days, you know, we've had some major changes that have been chronic for a long time, simply because people are now ready to communicate in a way that they weren't before.
Well, I think, and Brian, I want you to address this, but what I gather from what you're saying, Ray, is when you go through the process, it actually identifies very specific things to focus on, so that you don't sort of spend your time figuring out what are all the issues and throwing spaghetti against the wall and hoping something sticks. And also, I think the aspect of employee engagement. And when I've done retreats with organizations and the executives want to run off to a nice hotel and sort of discuss the business and do vision, mission, and values, we're not going to do it that way. Let's bring in your managers, bring in some employees. Let's get everybody involved, because the buy-in that you get from that is so much more effective, and you'll be amazed at the results that you get. And so I think, you know, Ray brought up a good point around, you know, being very specific around what are we addressing, so that from a time perspective, it's not more time, it's spending time on the appropriate things. Sure. And then also the employee engagement aspect, to make sure that it goes across your organization. You see change at a much faster rate.
Right. Yeah, and exactly. It's all about getting better performance, and it's focusing on the right activities that you do well, and understanding the ones you don't do well, and figure out some kind of resolution as to how you fill that need based upon what you have internally and externally. And the problem is that if you're just working, as we talked about earlier, on the symptoms, as Ray brought up in the doctor analogy, is that we're putting Band-Aids on problems. We're not really fixing the real core problems. And truthfully, I think most of us agree, the people that really know the answers to the real core problems are not the executive team. It's the people doing the work.
Right.
Yeah. They're the ones living and breathing with the customers, with the day-to-day operational activities. They see the workflow. They're probably most likely to be the ones that can fix it, and they could fix it themselves, but many won't, because they feel, one, it's not my job. I haven't been given that authority to take that decision. They haven't been empowered to do that. They don't feel they're part of the organization or part of the team. They're just there to do their job. And in today's economy and global economy, that just doesn't work anymore. We need people that are empowered to take risks, to fix things that need to be addressed, or at least to feel comfortable that they can raise those issues to the people that make the decision on what to do. And that's a real leadership issue. And I think that's another new paradigm shift that's taken on growing importance, is that today leadership is more important than ever. And in fact, a leader that can take the risk of saying, I'm willing to assess my organization, I'm willing to assess myself, my effectiveness, is going to be so much more effective going forward, because they're going to see things that they can't see, and they're going to see things that others see and know how to fix those problems. They just have to ask, and they have to feel comfortable in giving the team the opportunity to speak up and to make those decisions, if they can, at the lower level, and then they'll get more productivity. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And you know, one of the things that you said is about using resources and sort of opening up our minds and looking outside, thinking outside the box. And you know, we've talked about virtual business models and things of that nature. And I know that between Consultants Link and Brian, your company, and Ray Anderson Business Coaching, you've come up with a way to really work together and address some of the key challenges businesses face in a very unique way. And it kind of comes out of the quad strat assessment and identifying what are the key issues to focus on. And then you formed a partnership to help go into an organization and deal with those issues very effectively. So can we start by talking about the partnership in and of itself, and then how does that look in terms of going into a business once the assessment is done and helping them address these issues in a very effective way?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think the alignment working with Ray is a really good one, and it flows out of the idea that we need people that can go in and talk to the executive team to understand their issues and their problems, as well as to what understand the organizational problems are. And that's usually best done with a coach. You know, as you said, if you want to become a better golfer or a better athlete, most professional athletes have a coach. And if you have someone that can communicate with the executive level to really see what drives them, both on a personal and a business level, I think that's just a great thing to have. And I would recommend it highly to any business owner that really wants to move forward to the next level. But in working with them, like Ray does, and then using the next phase, which is some form of assessment in terms of evaluation, I think that finally pigeonholes really what the real root problems are. And where consulting comes in is working with Ray in that assessment process. Once we identify what those critical, most important things are, hopefully we can narrow them down to maybe 2 or 3. And we call it in the terms of quad reds. Then we can identify, well, what resources exist internal to the organization to solve that. In many cases, they're already there. They just need to be realigned and made to work more effectively. But in many cases, you know, many businesses are just limited because of just the nature of their business. They only have so much talent, and it takes external resources, and that requires external human resources, but also other resources that might be entities of nature, manufacturing, distribution, et cetera. So what Consultants Link is doing is basically providing a venue for companies that are searching for additional talent, additional resources that they could bring into their company to help them solve a need for a specific purpose. And that could be not necessarily a long-term solution, but could be if it needed to be. There's interim management capabilities, but in many cases it's really getting back to some kind of functional need. And QuadStrat being a good sales and marketing assessment tool for one, as well as an organizational and a culture tool. There's many things that can be done to bring in what we call SWAT teams. Those are, you know, drawing from the metaphor special weapons and tactics teams that we're all familiar with at the law enforcement level. Applying that same kind of principle to business and bringing highly caliber, highly specialized expertise to come in and to solve a problem that's missing in the organization. That's what consulting can do for companies. And how that evolves is really out of first knowing what is the real root problems are. And you know, we find that working with you know, people like Ray and coaches and also people that have an assessment process, it just helps the organization waste less time and less money on getting the resources and the talent they need to work on the problems that need to be done.
You know, it's interesting. There's, you know, and it was mentioned earlier, the concept of experience. And I think that's going to be challenged in the business world moving forward because a lot of people have experience. I mean, 20, 30, 40 years. And when I hear that now, I get a little bit skeptical because I look at, it's not just the experience, it's the result. And if you're a CEO watching this program, you're thinking, all this sounds great, I'm looking at results. I'm looking at if my challenge is time, how do I generate more time for myself? If my challenge is cash flow, how do I generate more cash flow? If my challenge is you know, talent, how do I bring in the best talent? If my challenge is revenue generation, how do I do that? And I think people are looking for individuals that have expertise in those areas that have proven results. And so Ray, I'm going to turn the question over to you in terms of this process of the quad strat and the quad red, identifying key issues with the business, and then bringing in this concept of a resource. Well, I guess first looking at internal resources to see what exists in the business, and then if you don't have the proper resources within the business, then looking outside to the SWAT team concept that Brian mentioned. But I was going to fold my arms because I can see the CEOs doing that. Yeah. Tell me about the results.
Yeah, if I can, because I think you've touched on something that's really, really critical. And, you know, one of the things that we like to think we can do in getting results is that typically one of the challenges I see as a CEO, he's really frustrated with why his people are not producing more results, and it sometimes devolves to the point of, they just aren't smart enough. And the truth of the matter, in my experience, has been they're smart enough, they just aren't trained enough. And so many times what happens is that, particularly at the front line, they don't even know what the vision is. They have no idea what the values are. They don't even know what's happening on the job many times. And I can share example after example in which they're doing what they think is right. So a lot of that is about mining what I call the cognitive reserve inside the organization. There is a lot more going on, and they need to know that when they say something, it's going to be applied. And I can't tell you the number of times somebody in the front line has said, well, I brought this up 4 times. And they called me a troublemaker, so I'm not bringing it up anymore. And so those are the kind of disengagements we find that really hurt the organization on an internal level. On the external level, the real good CEO will understand that he needs to build his own capacity, and he only can do that by getting other people on the outside who can look at the organization objectively and say, look, I have no dog in this fight, but here's what I see that needs to be done. So he doesn't have an emotional tie to it, and it makes it much easier for us then to be able to build the skills inside the organization if they need to be built. And occasionally, 10% of the time, you have somebody who shouldn't be there. But it's that rare. It's about 10%. In most cases, the frustration comes from nobody listening. So, when it comes to results, like I said, in a matter of days, we can start moving people in the right direction. It's not uncommon for us to get 3 to 5 times the investment for what they've put into this thing. So it's really important. And in fact, we're so committed to this that if they don't get the results that we're talking about here, we'll give them their money back. So.
Okay. Well, I like that.
Yeah.
The money back guarantee. Ray, we've talked a lot about your quad strat approach and the quad red, identifier of the key issues in business and the SWAT team analysis of bringing a team in to address an issue. For our CEOs watching the program, can you give us a very specific example of that process and the results it delivered for the organization?
Yeah, sure. We had a client that was a plastic manufacturer here in Southern California. And initially he was skeptical. He wasn't quite sure whether this would work or whether it'd be effective. And once we got the results, we simply brought together his CFO, his plant manager, and a couple of other people that were in functional roles. And what astounded him is how quickly they were able to just go to the items that were identified by them as important. And we understood that there were some communication issues between departments that were resolved. Within a matter of weeks, he had a couple of items that they'd been struggling with for years that the team itself brought to the table, and they fixed it. And he said, look, if Ray comes knocking on the door, you got to talk to him, because we were able to get results that quickly.
And what was the key problem that was identified?
The key problem was that, and as a sales and marketing guy, Jamar, you might appreciate this. I've frequently found that there's typically a war between the sales guys who are out there selling something, and the production guy says, you want it when? And the issue was that the sales guys would go out there, and the production was fighting it, because they were saying, well, wait a minute, you had 2 weeks and you cut it down to 3 days, now you want us to complete it. And so the issue was, how do we communicate more tightly with one another? And they began to appreciate each other's challenges and began to work together instead of working against one another. So there's the example that produced huge results for them.
No, great example. We're about to wrap up the show. What I'd like to just have each of you take 15 seconds and sort of, speak to the CEOs that tune into the program and sort of summarize, our discussion and what you would like to share with them to really help them sleep better at night.
Yeah, Jamar, I think key to what you're talking about is basically trying to get better performance, better results, and more growth. And one of the processes to do that is to understand what your key performance drivers are. And if it's cash flow, revenue growth, talent, or time, then you need to identify what's going on in those respective areas. And we found one of the best ways to do that is to use an assessment process. And if you do that, you'll just save a lot of time of doing things that you don't get to where you want to go, and you'll quickly identify the 3 most important issues that are affecting your business. Work on those. Spend 80% of your time working on those 20% of the goals that you want to accomplish, and you'll be further ahead than you were before you started that. And second to that is then once you do understand that, then you can have a better, clearer understanding as to what to do. And through our process of working with Ray and others, we found that it usually amounts to a couple of things. One is to have a meeting with the executive team to discuss that, and then come up with a strategy, which is basically some form of plan as to what you're going to do in the next 90 days. Because it's very time dependent, and we want to see our clients achieve results very quickly. We hope to see results in 10 days or less, which hopefully will affect the bottom line in 90 days or less. And we're committed to that. So I recommend, if you are a CEO listening to the program, that you consider maybe using some of these tools and these strategies basically to help you take your business to the next level.
Ray, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, and one of our strategies in the 90 days is what we call a 10% improvement plan. And we've talked about this before, Jamar, but it starts with the CEO. And if we can save at a 40-hour week, that's 4 hours a week for him. And down at the front line, that's 4 hours a week. If you multiply that by the number of people in the organization, it's an enormous amount of free time for improving talent, for getting revenue improvements, for getting all the things that we talked about, including cash flow. So the real goal is that what this does, it aligns you with very limited resources, enables you to move them forward. It enables you to focus clearly in knowing where you are in relationship to 4,000 other companies. So it's not just some vague idea, it's a very purposeful one based on what we think are best practices. So all in all, it will help an organization focus those limited critical resources on the things that are most important to getting them to where they need to go to streamline the organization. So it can be very powerful.
Great. Well, Ray and Brian, I want to thank you both for being on the show today. And what I gather from our discussion in looking at the 4 things that the majority of CEOs deal with and that keeps them up at night: time, cash flow, talent, and revenue generation. What I gather from our discussion is that a lot of CEOs are spending time working in their business versus on their business. They're spending time on these areas that are not really helping them grow, not really focus on bringing in the best talent, not really focus on having enough time to focus on those issues that are really, really important, and also not having the ability to generate the cash flow because they're managing issues, communication issues, problems in the organization. And so I think by doing the assessment and getting the root cause of the issues and not just symptoms, and then focusing the time very specifically on those particular challenges that can help generate the biggest return for the organization, I think that's really what I gather from our discussion. So once again, I want to thank you, Brian. Thank you, Ray, for being on the show.
Thank you for having us.
And you've been watching the ACES Business Academy with Brian Connors, Executive Director of Consultants Link, and Ray Anderson, CEO of Anderson Business Coaching. If you have any questions or comments based on what you've learned in this segment, just submit them along with your contact information using the form at the bottom of your screen. For more information you may find useful, please visit our resources page for additional videos and content. Also, if you're interested in speaking directly with a consultant like Ray or Brian about solutions specifically tailored to your business, the ACES Consulting Alliance includes a host of knowledgeable professionals with expertise in management, sales training, marketing and advertising, social media, human resources, and other key areas. For more information, call us at 951-781-8624 or visit acescalifornia.org and click on the Contact Us tab. I'm Jamar Brown, and I want to thank you for watching the weekly coaching series from the ACES Business Academy.